Trump and Clinton vote for themselves, how today's New York primary could give the frontrunners a big delegate boost. The president flies overseas. We look at challenges surrounding his visits with U.S. allies. Pope Francis asks the forgiveness of refugees. Also, how the life of one refugee family changes thanks to the Pope's intervention. And remembering Pope Benedict XVI. How the world received the news of his election 11 years ago today. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, April 19th, 2016. Good evening from Washington. Thanks for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick. Polls show frontrunners Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton are likely to win today's New York presidential primary. Trump cast his ballot in his hometown of New York City, where he built his multi-billion-dollar real estate business. Republicans there seem to favor him over Ted Cruz, who earlier disparaged so-called New York values. Trump says today's vote was an easy decision for him.
It was a great honor, really. Who would have thought? This was just a great honor, and I think it's a great honor for New York. New York is a special place.
Trump picks up an endorsement from former New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani. He says he's voting for Trump but not joining his campaign. In the past, Giuliani has dodged endorsing Trump. Hillary Clinton also cast a ballot today in New York, her adopted state, where she served as U.S. Senator. Former President Bill Clinton joined her at a polling place near their home in Chappaqua. Hillary later posed for pictures with supporters.
It feels great, and I am so excited about both campaigning here in New York, voting here in New York, and I love New York.
Even before today's results are in, Clinton's campaign declares the Democratic race virtually over. Her camp wants Bernie Sanders to tone down his criticism so as not to hurt the party's eventual nominee. Sanders has won the last 7 states, but many of them were small with few delegates. Other stories our EWTN News Nightly team is covering in today's world. 5 senators call on President Obama to press Saudi Arabia on human rights issues. In particular, they're concerned about 2 activists jailed for questioning Islam. The president left Washington today for the Saudi Kingdom, which bans Catholicism and other forms of Christianity. The White House acknowledges the nuclear deal with Iran and the 9/11 bill are sources of tension between the 2 countries, but the administration is quick to point out a strong partnership in the war on terror.
That's why we're able to cooperate. It does not mean that there are not differences between our 2 countries. There are substantial differences between our 2 countries, and the president does not hesitate to raise his concerns about those differences as well. I'm confident that he'll do that in the context of the meetings that he's preparing for later this week.
Saudi Arabia threatens to sell off $750 of its assets in America if Congress passes the 9/11 bill. That bill would allow victims of the September 11th attacks to sue Saudi Arabia, which denies any involvement in the attacks. Such suits could result in American courts freezing Saudi assets here in the U.S. The Obama administration is lobbying Congress to reject that bill. Members of Congress ask and are looking for solutions to stop the genocide of Christians and other religious minorities by ISIS. Wyatt Goolsby reports tonight from Capitol Hill. Wyatt?
Brian, advocates for Christians and other religious minorities in the Middle East are here in Washington. They're offering recommendations to protect those that are most vulnerable in the region. Members of the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission hosted this afternoon's hearing, which laid out numerous atrocities by ISIS in Iraq and Syria. They brought in experts for panel discussions. The goal is to figure out what concrete options the U.S. has to stopping the violence. On March 17th, Secretary of State John Kerry labeled the ongoing attacks genocide. Every panelist agreed on one point, that the U.S. and its allies should use a range of resources, military and diplomatic, to defeat ISIS and protect religious minorities.
The internet and electronic communications, and we're acting militarily, and we're strengthening the moderate forces. By moderate, I don't care about the theology. I mean any group that is willing to abide by the rule of law and eschew the use of force to impose their views on others. We are strengthening moderate forces in every one of these countries that groups like ISIL's presence is being felt.
There are other things that need to be done as well in the diplomatic domain, in the domain of humanitarian assistance, bringing leaders together, especially religious leaders, not just political leaders, but religious leaders together to form a unified front against ISIS and against the atrocities being committed by Assad. There's a lot that we can do, and we just got to get around to doing it.
Today's hearing is not the first for this commission. They held a similar panel discussion last week. The State Department says they are already working to implement some of the recommendations, but it's a process that will take months. Brian?
All right, Wyatt Goolsby at the Capitol, thank you. Congress attempts to cut off sources of terror funding. The Financial Services Task Force to investigate terror financing held a hearing today. Members say ISIS sells antiquities looted from cultural sites, even to people here in the U.S. It's difficult to track because many agencies aren't properly equipped to do so.
We have a very effective FBI art crime team that could use more resources and higher priority. But I don't think we have that same level of expertise within Customs. Sure. And we don't have it within the U.S. Attorney's offices other than probably the Southern District of New York.
Analysts claim ISIS raises more than $100 million from the sale of stolen antiquities and archaeological treasures. They call it the largest cultural challenge since World War II. The Taliban claims responsibility for an attack that killed at least 28 people and wounded more than 320. 2 militants were involved in the assault on a government agency in Kabul, Afghanistan. One drove a small truck rigged with hundreds of kilograms of explosives. The second entered the compound after the explosion, opening fire before he was eventually killed. An American commander condemns the attack. General John Nicholson says the U.S. remains firmly committed to supporting our Afghan partners and the national unity government. Belgium investigates the possibility that Islamic State group has sent more fighters to Europe. The country remains on high alert because the threat is still there, according to security experts. Belgian authorities believe they have destabilized the network that carried out the March 22nd suicide attacks on the Brussels airport and the city's subway. A federal appeals court overturns a policy barring a female student who identifies as male from using a boys' restroom at school. The court calls the Gloucester County, Virginia School Board policy discriminatory. That case could have implications for a similar law in North Carolina. Opponents of that law are pressuring the state financially. The Raleigh Convention and Visitors Bureau says losses have now reached $3 million. Supporters say the law is about privacy, that gender is based on the sex you're born with. They don't think it's appropriate for men to use women's restrooms or vice versa. A lawmaker withdraws plans to pass a gender identity bill in Tennessee. He says he wants to see how legal challenges play out in other states. It's not clear how today's ruling in Virginia might influence that Tennessee proposal. Pope Francis delivers a powerful message to refugees, asking their forgiveness for society's indifference to their plight.
Perdonate la chiusura e l'indifferenza.
Francis recorded a brief video message for the 35th anniversary of the establishment of a Jesuit center for refugees in Italy. The Pope describes refugees as brothers who should be treated as gift and not as a problem. Francis brought 12 Syrian Muslim refugees from the Greek island of Lesbos back to the Vatican with him last weekend. And Pope Francis responds to the media's single focus on his broad document on family life. He's concerned his critical message isn't being heard. Ed Pentin, the Rome correspondent for EWTN's National Catholic Register, joining us from Rome. Ed, what did Pope Francis say about the heart of his message that's being overlooked?
Okay, Brian. Well, I think he's a bit saddened. He said that the wider issues related to the family aren't being covered, and he lists them as being, first of all, a crisis in the family. He talks about young people not getting married, the fall in birth rate in Europe, and the fact that jobs are hard to come by, and that parents have to work 2 jobs often to make ends meet. So he wanted all these issues aired, and he was rather disappointed that they weren't during the synod, and he thinks that the media was at fault at that.
What else stands out from his signature in-flight news conference?
Well, he was also asked about the meeting, the controversial meeting at the weekend with Bernie Sanders, the US presidential candidate. He said that he simply met him at a greeting in Casa Santa Marta, where his residence is. It was merely a courtesy, and he was just happy to just say that that was simply good manners to meet him. He also talked about the importance of integrating all kinds of people, especially when it comes to migrants, and to build bridges. Those were his main themes in the press conference as well.
And where will the Pope's travels take him next, Ed?
Okay, well, his next trip is in June to Armenia, June the 24th to the 26th. And then he's off to Poland for World Youth Day in July. And then lastly, the next big trip for him will be Georgia and Azerbaijan at the end of September. So he's still got quite a few trips to come. And he's traveling more than people thought, but he is going to do those trips in the forthcoming months.
Thank you, Ed Pentin, National Catholic Register Rome correspondent.
Thanks, Brian.
Coming up, a Texas city inundated with rain, the ongoing rescue effort in Houston. And Pope Francis provides hope for a refugee family now adjusting to a new life in Italy. We're grateful you can join us for EWTN News Nightly on this Tuesday evening. I'm Brian Patrick. Flooding makes life very difficult in and around Houston. Emergency crews are still rescuing flood victims this morning. Many homes are inundated with water after nearly a foot of rain there. People used anything they could find, air mattresses, even refrigerators, to float to safety.
My townhouse is flooded downstairs. My refrigerator, everything is floating. I got a dry upstairs. I got room, but a lot of people trying to get away from here because they got kids.
At least 5 people have died in the flooding. Nearly a dozen Red Cross shelters have opened in the Houston area to help the evacuees. The body of a 71-year-old Florida Franciscan priest has been found in Georgia. Father Rene Robert had been missing since last week from his parish in St. Augustine. He was found dead Monday in Waynesboro, Georgia. 28-year-old Stephen Murray was arrested last week in Aiken, South Carolina, driving Father Robert's car. Murray will now likely be charged with first-degree murder and kidnapping. The local sheriff says the priest had tried to help Murray, who police characterize as a career criminal. One of the religious sisters killed in Saturday's Ecuador earthquake has a connection with EWTN. 33-year-old Sister Claire Crockett was the voice of Lucy in the children's series Hi, Lucy. It aired on our network for many years. Sister Claire and 5 postulants from the Servant Sisters of the Home of the Mother were killed in that 7.8 magnitude earthquake over the weekend. It is a race against time to find survivors of that quake. It flattened buildings in Ecuador. Hundreds more international rescuers are arriving this week. The official death count has surpassed 400. It could rise quite a bit in the days ahead. Among the dead, an American and 2 Canadians. More than 2,000 people have been injured. Imagine suffering the horrors of war, then life as a refugee, and finally being blessed to be lifted out of that misery. Tonight, we meet one of the 3 Syrian families Pope Francis brought back to the Vatican from the Greek island of Lesbos. The pleasures of daily life are once more within the grasp of 7-year-old Qudus Shakurji and her family. They fled their home in ISIS-controlled Deir al-Zor in northeast Syria, first to Turkey, then to Greece. Their fortunes changed dramatically Saturday when Pope Francis flew them and 2 other Syrian families to Italy after his visit to refugees in Lesbos, Greece. Her father, Ahmed, is still in disbelief. We boarded the plane with the Pope, he recalls. We sat next to him, not in the back, and twice he came to check on us and welcome us. The atmosphere on the plane was unreal, says Cecilia Pani of the community of San Egidio, the Catholic charity tasked with helping these new arrivals. They ate a good meal of lasagna. The children ate chocolate. Qudus is basking in the attention, grabbing a microphone and interviewing her father. Her mother, Shuhela, relieved the nightmare, as she calls life in Syria, is over. But she recalls a moment of doubt when she was told they were going to Italy with Pope Francis. We were afraid, she says. We had heard many Syrians were being expelled back to Turkey. The family was in Lesbos for 50 days. During that time, she says no Arab officials visited their camp. No, unfortunately not. No one. She says, we are Arabs. This initiative should have come from the Arabs, but the Pope was way ahead of them in doing a good deed. Adjusting to life in a strange land won't be easy. The family's first visit to an Italian supermarket was confusing. Still, they're the blessed and fortunate ones. Hundreds of thousands more refugees are desperate to come to Europe. Is the State Department's declaration of genocide by ISIS making any difference for Christians in the Middle East? What action has been taken since then, and what is life like today for Christians and other religious minorities? Patrick Kelly, Vice President of Public Policy for the Knights of Columbus, joins us. Also, Kirsten Evans, Executive Director in Defense of Christians, is with us. So you just returned from the Middle East. What was it like? What did you witness there in those camps?
Yeah, Brian, we did. My staff and I had the real honor of going to visit some of the refugees that have fled from ISIS that are now living both in Lebanon as well as in Iraqi Kurdistan. It's hard to put into words what we witnessed. I think the two words that come to mind are both suffering and dignity. Right? These are people that have suffered enormously. They had, many of them, they tell you the stories. They had 1, a 2, a 3-hour notice to leave. They packed a suitcase, got their families, and they left their homes usually thinking they would be back in a week or 2 weeks. It's now been almost 2 years, and they're living as refugees in foreign countries.
Pope Francis said pretty much the same. He saw a lot of suffering, especially among the children. Has any action been taken, Patrick, since this genocide declaration?
There has been action. In fact, a hearing today on the Hill is an important step. That wouldn't have happened without the genocide declaration. Now what we need to do is keep up the pressure and continue to investigate. The genocide is an ongoing situation. It's not, so we need to keep up the pressure on it. The U.S. government can continue to investigate through the variety of means that it has, but also at the UN. The UN Security Council can refer ISIS to the International Criminal Court, which can further investigate and also refer ISIS to prosecution if events develop in that direction.
So it's not just Christians being persecuted, it's all religious minorities. You talked with religious leaders. What do you hear from them?
We did. So we were blessed to have meetings with almost all of the major patriarchs in the region, religious leaders in the region. One of the things that I think struck us as most interesting is that across Orthodox, Catholic, Assyrian, Syrian, they all had the same message. They had 2 asks from us. The first was to help them to alleviate the immediate suffering of these communities. The churches have absorbed an enormous amount of refugees themselves and are trying to meet those needs out of Christian charity, and they simply can't. So they're asking for aid, for help, for programs, for education, for anything we can give them. But the second thing that they were asking, and that we found really interesting across the board, is our communities want to return home. We want international protection. Our people want to go back. They want to live in their native homeland. They want to live in their ancestral homeland. Help us get our people back to the place where they belong.
Well, everyone wants a future. How do you think we can help these Christians especially see that they do have a future?
I think, a key way is humanitarian assistance. And one way to do that is through the Knights of Columbus Refugee Relief Program. And I would urge everyone to go to christiansatrisk.org.
You've raised a lot of money.
We've raised $10 million so far for direct aid to Christians. But I think also we need to work, I think the U.S. government and all of civil society needs to work to end the discrimination against Christians and other minorities that's endemic in the society there. That's a very, very important step.
All right, Patrick Kelly with the Knights of Columbus, Kirsten Evans in Defense of Christians. Thank you both and your organizations for the good work you do, and thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian.
Up next, 2 important anniversaries. We remember the victims of the Oklahoma City bombing and the joy felt on the day Pope Benedict XVI was elected exactly 11 years ago today. The royal road to peace is to see others not as enemies to be opposed, but as brothers and sisters to be embraced. A beautiful tweet from Pope Francis today on this Tuesday evening. Thanks for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick. Loved ones of the 168 people who died gathered today on this 21st anniversary of the Oklahoma City bombing. On April 19, 1995, the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building was destroyed by a massive truck bomb.
We will always remember the resiliency, the courage, the compassion, the forgiveness, the healing that took place over the last 21 years.
Oklahoma City Archbishop Paul Coakley posted this prayer on Facebook. Lord, we pray especially that violence and hatred will never rule our hearts, but will always be overcome by mercy and forgiveness and compassion. In the face of such tragedy, we revisit a story of hope and healing Angela Buckaloo shares one family's journey to peace 2 decades after that fateful day.
We were extremely close. I spoiled her a lot. And if she were alive today, I'd still be spoiling her. I know that.
Julie Marie Welch would have been 43 years old today. A devout cradle Catholic, Julie went to Catholic high school and college.
She was killed in the Oklahoma City bombing April 19th, 1995, which was 11 months after graduating from Marquette.
This is the Oklahoma City National Memorial, where the Alfred P. Murrow Federal Building once stood. Julie worked as a Spanish interpreter at the Social Security office there. In a field of 168 empty chairs, one is inscribed with Julie's name. Bud turned to alcohol and anger to quell his pain, and neither worked.
The first month after her death, I didn't want a trial for them. I simply wanted the bastards fried. That was my feeling toward them. This is coming from a person, all my life I had always opposed the death penalty. I had never truly been tested, and I was tested then.
It took a year, but Julie's dad, Bud, says he eventually realized the self-medicating would kill him physically, and that pursuing the death penalty would kill him spiritually. Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols were tried and convicted. Nichols will spend the rest of his life behind bars, while McVeigh received the death penalty and was executed in 2001.
We took Tim McVeigh from his cage and we killed him. And there was nothing about that process that brought me any peace. I felt re-victimized when that happened.
Bud says Julie would have absolutely agreed with his stance against the death penalty, that she would not have wanted Timothy McVeigh or Terry Nichols executed. An activist, Julie protested against the death penalty in high school and college. Before he was executed, Timothy McVeigh got word of a special gift that Bud gave to him and perhaps to himself that set Bud free. Are you telling me you've forgiven Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols?
I have. It took a long time to do it, but I've forgiven them for the act that they did. When your children die, you bury them in your heart. And it simply never goes away. That does not mean that you can't forgive.
Not to say Bud doesn't miss Julie. He has every day for the last 20 years and will for the rest of his life. But for Bud, with forgiveness, he's able to live it in peace. In Oklahoma City, Angela Buckaloo, EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you, Angela. And this year it is 21 years. Well, 11 years ago today, the first conclave of the new millennium elected the successor to Pope John Paul II. Tonight, we take you back to April 19, 2005, when Germany's Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger became Pope Benedict XVI. With those words, the world learned Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger had been elected leader of the Catholic Church. St. Peter's Square quickly filled with pilgrims and tourists wanting to witness history. The balcony was prepared, and then the moment everyone was waiting for. Pope Benedict XVI greeted the elated crowd. His election came after less than 2 full days into the conclave.
I think that rather than a victory for conservatives, the election of Cardinal Ratzinger is actually a demonstration of the unity of the Church. The quickness, especially, of the election seems to suggest that there weren't great divisions within the College of Cardinals, that it was a fairly easy choice to go with Cardinal Ratzinger. It's a choice of continuity with John Paul II.
In Rome and around the world, people of all faiths reacted.
May God give him the strength to lead his flock.
On that note, until tomorrow for the EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Brian Patrick, and we're going to leave you with special moments shared by now Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI and Pope Francis. Good night, and may God bless our good shepherds.